Alright, it's time we enter part 2 of this Peanuts Palooza. 10 more specials to review. We're also starting to reach some of the more less famous ones that perhaps your average layman may not be as aware of. At least not compared to their more classic specials from the previous outing. So who knows? Maybe there'll be a hidden gem or two. Or maybe history has forgotten some of these for a reason. Well, there's only one way to find out. But before we get started, as always, a quick thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. And if you enjoy the content I make and would like to offer your support, then for as little as $1 a month, you can get your name listed right here at the start of every video. Link to that is in the description below. Alright, let's waste no more time. Let's just dive right in. It's a mystery, Charlie Brown. Alright, we're kicking things off with the first Peanut special that was not directed by Bill Melendez. We have officially entered the Phil Roman era of Peanuts. And the first outing is fine, but I wish it could have been so much more than what it was. Now, I love me some mysteries. I love a good old-fashioned detective story that's able to pull the wool over my eyes and actually manage to genuinely surprise me with how a crime was pulled off. So, in theory, this one should have been right up my alley. But there's kind of a problem with that. I'd say the most disappointing thing about this special is that this really isn't much of a mystery. I mean, the instant Woodstock's bird nest disappears, you know exactly who took it and why. The plot is more of an excuse to just tell some jokes in which Snoopy is dressed up as Sherlock Holmes. I would have kind of thought they would have done something like have some real clues, some red herrings, or kids acting suspicious for no reason. I mean, there's a lot of fun ways you can play around with this. But, and again, I guess you could argue it's not really trying to be a mystery, and I shouldn't be judging it based on what I want it to be, and instead critique it on what it's trying to be. But then I guess if it's not going to be a mystery, then I don't know why you would put mystery in the title, but hey, no use splitting hairs over the title of a 50-year-old television special. And with all that being said, there are things to admire about this one. There's a lot of jokes that do work, like Snoopy harshly interrogating Charlie Brown, who just seems so lost and confused with the whole thing. Or Snoopy going around and harassing Linus and Lucy by dusting for fingerprints. To even Linus's bizarre and completely out of nowhere gimmick in the scene, in which he quotes 3 separate couplets using the quote, "ashes to ashes and dust to dust," from the Book of Common Prayer as the first line. Sure, it's weird, but it works because it fits perfectly with Linus's character. And as with most specials, it's always nice to see Snoopy and Woodstock work off of each other, even if they are going through the motions. And then the special's third act makes up the Peanuts' take of doing a courtroom-style scene, with Lucy acting as the adjudicator. This not only provides some more good jokes with Snoopy acting as Woodstock's lawyer and overcomplicating things, contrasting it with Sally's blunt and childish defense, but it's also really funny to me how Lucy had everything ready to go and act as a judge, just on the off chance that she was ever asked to arbitrate a case. And I should note that Lucy actually sided with Woodstock in this case, even though his own lawyer had antagonized and deeply annoyed her the previous night. Now that's what you call an unbiased judge. This scene is good, although I also can't help but feel that a Peanut special in which the entire thing is a take on courtroom dramas could have made an entire special all on its own, with more of the Peanuts gang getting involved, maybe doing some kind of Rashomon parody, especially since this is definitely something I can 1000% believe that kids would do. You know, create their own mock court system. But again, that's me wanting a special to do what I want it to do, rather than judge it for what it is. And for what it is good, if unremarkable. Now, there are gags that repeat too much, like the bit of Snoopy blowing a bubble with his pipe and it getting Woodstock wet like 4 times. And the opening bit of Woodstock getting caught in the bird bath goes on too long, and it takes up a good solid 5 minutes. Almost like they didn't have enough material to actually make this the full 25 minutes. But in the end, the special as a whole does work. And of course, fitting into the Peanuts' cynical style, after Woodstock went to all that hard work of tracking down his bird nest, in the end credits, it completely falls apart again. C'est la vie. Not necessarily the Peanuts' strongest outing by any means, but it's a nice, breezy little watch with some fun moments to keep you engaged. Although one that is marred by a nagging suspicion that it could have and should have been a contender for one of the greats. It's the Easter Beagle, Charlie Brown. Well, I, for one, am appalled, shocked, and offended that this Peanuts Easter special makes absolutely no reference whatsoever to the true meaning of the season, especially after they mention the real meaning of Christmas in A Charlie Brown Christmas. I mean, not talking about the betrayal of Jesus, the arrest, the crown of thorns, the violent flogging, the nails being driven into his wrist, his dead body being stabbed through the side, and blood and water spewing from the wound. Okay, maybe I can kind of understand why they didn't want to mention it in a kids' television program. Anyway, I'm actually kind of curious if this bit of the Christmas decorations overshadowing the Easter decorations was intended by the creators to be a commentary about how people put too much focus on the birth of Jesus and not enough on the death and resurrection of Jesus. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it doesn't feel like a coincidence that they chose Easter as the holiday that this happened to. Anyway, since we've talked about it, yeah, this scene is great. The complete absurdity that a department store would already be advertising Christmas decorations in April is just such a funny idea. And it's an idea that always stuck with me. There's more than a few moments like that throughout the special. There's a subplot about Snoopy buying Woodstock a birdhouse. There's the bit of Snoopy looking into a ceramic egg and imagining that he's dancing with a group of bunnies, which you could actually argue he's practicing his Easter Beagle dance. So that's some nice foreshadowing right there. There's the little brief dance in the department store between Snoopy, Peppermint Patty, and Marcy. All of these just wonderful little moments that, while yes, don't contribute much if anything to the overall story, it feels like a part of the whole. It wouldn't feel like the Peanuts if it didn't have these little diversions, and it adds to the overall charm. But since it's been brought up, let's talk about the part of this that, for better or worse, literally everyone remembers, and that's the side plot between Peppermint Patty and Marcy trying to paint Easter eggs. Emphasis on try. What we have here is almost an interesting role reversal of the typical Peppermint Patty and Marcy interactions. Wherein here, Marcy is actually the dumb one who is apparently so stupid she thinks that Easter eggs have to be cracked open before they're colored. Probably the single dumbest thing she's ever done in the specials and the comics in general is when she puts an egg on top of a toaster and is shocked when it doesn't go down. And this is a scene that I can see a lot of people have wildly varying reactions to. On one hand, the scenes are well handled. The way she keeps messing up the eggs are memorable, most especially the bit with the waffle iron. Also, I just love this look of satisfaction on Marcy's face after she accidentally makes egg soup. Like, she's so proud of herself for what she's done, only for that look of satisfaction to be wiped off her face when Peppermint Patty once again informs her, no, that's not how you boil Easter eggs. But on the other hand, yeah, it is kind of strange to see Marcy in this kind of role where she's not only dumb, but almost brain dead levels of dumb. And on top of that, it is frustrating that after the first time it happened, Peppermint Patty still doesn't show Marcy how to boil the Easter eggs, instead just leaving her to her own devices, not just once, but twice. Honestly, at that point, you can't blame Marcy for that. You should know that you can't trust her to do it right after the first time. So I can see people claiming that the scenes are dumb or frustrating, and I get where they're coming from. Me personally, I do think the scenes work, and I do find the antics pretty funny, but some parts do frustrate me a little bit. But like I said, for better or worse, you don't forget them. These are the scenes that seem to stick with everybody, and I think that's the best way to describe this special as a whole. It sticks with you. It sticks with you, and you remember it. I remembered the bit of the escalators. I remembered the bit of Sally tripping on her shoes. I remembered the fantastic, funky remix of the Snoopy and Woodstock instrumental that would play in all their scenes together. I remember Lucy's attempt at remembering where she hid all the eggs. I remember the scene at the end of Snoopy playing the part of the Easter Beagle and handing out Easter eggs to all the kids. And I remember that he ran out of eggs before reaching Charlie Brown, that's just a perfect conclusion to the scene. And if I'm allowed to put on my fan theory hat for a moment, I like to think that the whole Easter Beagle thing was something that Linus and Snoopy cooked up together. I mean, think about it. Linus was probably still horribly embarrassed after what happened with the Great Pumpkin fiasco from last October. And so he cooked up this story of the Easter Beagle in order to make the neighborhood kids forget about that story. And Snoopy agreed to help because, anything to mess with Lucy. Plus, given how Easter was mentioned in the special to be a time of renewal, it does kind of make sense that this time the Linus tells a fantastical story plot ends on an optimistic note. The one aspect about the special that I am still horribly confused by, even after all these years, is this bit of Snoopy's nose getting stuck in Woodstock's birdhouse. Like, are they trying to convey that this was supposed to be an accident? Because as a kid, I thought Snoopy did this on purpose because he was jealous of Woodstock's bachelor pad. And watching it as an adult, it does still look like that's what they're trying to convey, because it looks like it was done on purpose. But every summary that I can find says that it was done on accident. So, am I just missing something here? Am I literally the only person that sees this? I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Anyway, this one may not be completely 100% polished. For instance, the bit of Snoopy buying the birdhouse for the second time, just recycles the animation from before. But it's a nice, memorable little Easter treat. One that people keep coming back to year after year for good reason. Also, I should point out, even though, once again, nobody cares, this sign right here says there are 246 days until Christmas, which means the scene in question takes place on April 23rd. But Easter in 1974 was on April 14th. Although I should also note that the latest possible date for Easter Sunday to fall on is April 25th, 2 days after the scene in question, so it's not completely impossible. What does all this mean? It means I have way too much time on my hands. Be My Valentine, Charlie Brown. Out of the Peanuts mainstay holiday specials, I think the Valentine's Day special is the one that tends to get overlooked, which I think does it a disservice because I think this is one of the finest Peanut specials there is. This is a case where every single story is given precisely the attention that each one deserves, not a second less or a second more. The Peanuts' attitude towards love and romance has always been rather cynical. Unrequited love is the norm, and even when it's not, it inevitably ends in heartbreak due to a lack of maturity of the kids. And here, that attitude is on full display. This is exemplified in a main story that shows two instances of unrequited love that both feed into each other, with Linus buying a box of chocolates for his teacher that he has a crush on, which unintentionally causes Sally to believe that he bought the box of chocolates for her for Valentine's Day. Naturally, both of these stories end in tragedy, both characters victims of their own love blindness, or perhaps even delusion. As such, this is a special that's not necessarily about first love, it's more about first heartbreak, which is something that almost every child has to go through, and as adults, we can understand and relate to. And I will say that after having two specials in which Charlie Brown is relegated to a supporting character without really much to do, it is nice to see him, okay, not exactly front and center since the main plot is primarily centered on Linus, but he does have his own secondary story. In this case, Charlie Brown is excited at the possibility that he might finally get a Valentine. Charlie Brown's character can be described as optimistic in spite of the fact that hardly anything ever goes his way. And this is probably one of the better visual representations of that side of his character, being so optimistic that he actually brings a briefcase to school with him in order to carry all the Valentines that he's sure to get. And then the special ends on what's probably the most bittersweet note that it could for Charlie Brown, wherein he does finally get himself his first Valentine, albeit a used one from Violet. By the way, the scene of Schroeder sticking up for Charlie Brown after how all the girls treated him is a really great moment. So the stories are all great, and the comedy is wonderful as well. From the puppet show that Snoopy puts on, and having it be romance themed so that it matches the setting, and all the abuse that gets heaped on Lucy as a result, to the scene of Charlie Brown and Sally trying to cut hearts out of red paper, and Snoopy showing them up by doing this, to the scene of Sally reading the entirety of Sonnet 43 by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, which was somehow managed to be fit on an entire candy heart, to Charlie Brown getting his own candy heart that just says, "Forget it, kid," to the scene of Lucy destroying Schroeder's piano while describing a scene of how one day he'll see her as the one who got away, or the scene of a heartbroken Linus pouring out his heart and soul while throwing the chocolate away, only for us to see that both Snoopy and Woodstock are enjoying themselves a nice little treat, in a really twisted sense finding joy and solace in Linus's misfortune. It all works and all these pieces fit together nicely like a puzzle. In terms of negatives, they're small, but they are here. I'll admit, it is odd that the special makes the decision to have Peppermint Patty, Marcy, and Franklin going to the exact same school as Charlie Brown, when they had been previously established, even in other specials, as going to another school district. Now, normally this wouldn't be an issue, except both Peppermint Patty and Marcy canonically have established crushes on Charlie Brown. So it seems really odd that they would be included here in a story in which the whole point is that he didn't get any Valentines. Made especially egregious when you consider that neither of them has any lines. It doesn't knock it down too much, but I still think that was an odd decision. And I'll also say that this special does reuse animation from You're Not Elected Charlie Brown. But again, it's a very brief 2-second clip, so I won't knock it down too much for that. Those minor hiccups aside, I honestly can't think of a single problem with this special. I'm not sure this special gets brought up as one of the greats, but I truly think it is. A beautiful balancing act of examining the harsh reality of puppy love and truly funny moments of comedy. It's darn near a masterwork. Also, I just want to point out here that Snoopy really did charge Lucy 5 cents just for the privilege of being beat up by him. The absolute chaotic mad lad. You're a good sport, Charlie Brown. This one to me features a rather unique situation where I actually think the first 5 minutes, the part that's more or less disconnected from the main story, other than thematically, is actually the best part of the special. And the main story is just kind of okay. I'm not sure if anybody agrees with me, but I love the opening bit of Snoopy playing tennis with an at first unseen opponent. Like, I could watch this scene all by itself and be completely satisfied with it kind of love. It's fast, it's enjoyable, it's got some good comedy, it's got some incredibly funny animation and facial reactions from Snoopy, as well as some of the funniest sound bites of Bill Melendez voicing an angry Snoopy. So you could say they started the special with their best foot forward, and then the special takes not necessarily a nosedive because it's still fine, but the energy in the opening scene just seems missing. I mean, this is fine, it's just watching the Peanuts gang, or rather Charlie Brown, Snoopy, and Peppermint Patty, compete in a motocross race. But the scenes don't necessarily build the mounting tension like you would think that a racing story would. Instead, the pacing feels more laid back, which would normally be fine for Peanuts, but not really for a racing story. Not helping matters is that the backgrounds and terrain just aren't all that interesting to look at either, just a lot of dirt and brown colors. And then there's the really bizarre scene where very shortly into the race, both Charlie Brown and Snoopy, the masked Marvel, wipe out, and they're both taken away by ambulance. Snoopy to the hospital, and Charlie Brown to the vet. Then they just go back and re-enter the race like nothing happened. It's a mildly amusing moment, but it kind of disrupts the flow of the race. But there are still some great moments in here, like Snoopy taking the time to stop and have a picnic, obviously drawing parallels to Aesop's The Tortoise and the Hare. Plus, I love this shot of Snoopy getting stuck in the mud. And there's 2 other competitors that are already stuck in the mud, and apparently they were so distraught about losing the race that they just refused to abandon their bikes in the mud. And of course, the ending punchline to the whole thing where Charlie Brown wins, but is given a completely worthless prize, is just absolutely perfect. It's the kind of cruel subversion that makes Peanuts stand out in a franchise aimed at children. And ultimately, I do think that's the best way to describe this special. There's great things in this one, even if the special as a whole isn't. Oh, and of course there's this scene of Snoopy reading Play Dog. Okay, so many possibilities. How do I want to play this off? Do I go with the stock, for kids meme? Do I make a bad dog pun, or a dirty dog pun, or a wet dog pun, or a bury the bone pun? You know what? I think I'm just going to comment on how the joke doesn't make any sense because, dogs already don't wear clothes to begin with. It's Arbor Day, Charlie Brown. Perhaps it's fitting that the Peanuts holiday special about a mostly forgotten holiday is largely forgotten itself. And honestly, there's kind of a reason for it. This is a mostly dull outing of just random plot threads kind of thrown together without any sense of cohesion. It first opens up with a few jokes about Rerun on the back of his mother's bicycle, and as a side note, this is Rerun's first animated appearance. Then it becomes a few gags that take place at a library, with jokes that were done a lot better in Snoopy Come Home. Then the gang decides to plant some trees and plants on Charlie Brown's baseball diamond. And it spends 9 whole minutes building up to the punchline of Charlie Brown doesn't like it. Then they try to play a baseball game with all the surrounding foliage getting in the way, and bizarrely takes the opportunity to adapt a story from the comics of Schroeder promising to kiss Lucy if she hits a home run. And then the gang almost wins the game before it gets rained out right before the final out. Did it seem like these pieces don't really fit together? That's because they don't. I don't know if this is the case, so don't quote me on this, but this genuinely feels like a special that was made up because some higher-ups at the network demanded it, but nobody actually wanted to make it. So they just cobbled something together and hoped that it would suffice. I can't really pinpoint anything that's really bad about this. It's just that this is so mediocre. It doesn't do a single special thing. The pacing and plotting is sluggish. Even the voice acting seems kind of subpar in this one. There's no sense of passion, so even the ideas or jokes that should work just don't come alive. The only really dumb thing that I noticed was that the girls say that they were using all the bats to grow tomato plants, and yet somehow they're able to find bats for the game without any hassle. It's not anything major, it's just sloppy script writing. I will say that I did like this joke of Sally mistaking Arbor for Harbor, but that's about the only thing that stood out to me, at least about the special itself. Unfortunately, this special does have something noteworthy about it, and it's that this was the final Peanuts special that included compositions and recorded performances of Peanuts mainstay Vince Guaraldi. Rest in peace, you legend. You were taken away from us way too soon. It's your first kiss, Charlie Brown. In the annals of Peanuts history, with the dozens and dozens of specials out there, there are a handful that stand out as being some of the most infamous of the group. And this one might actually take the cake. And the controversy to this one was so severe, it actually led the crew going back and actually making changes to soften it up a little bit. It also doesn't help that the special has not just one controversy attached to it, but 2. First, let's start with the easiest one to talk about, and that's the fact that this special does include the first instance of the little red-haired girl being shown on screen. And not only that, but given a name as well. Now, Charles Schulz always said that he felt the little red-haired girl should never be shown, and it's for 2 reasons. The first is because it emphasizes just how scared Charlie Brown is to even talk to her, and thus he keeps his distance from her. And it also makes it easier for the audience to project their own lost love onto the character if we don't ever see her. In fact, we don't even figure out what her name is. And with this special, both of those rules are violated. Now, to an extent, this doesn't matter to me that much, because I think you can make a decent argument for showing her on screen, especially when the Peanuts movie actually managed to make it work almost 40 years later. But the difference is that in that film, the little red-haired girl had a personality. She was actually given things to say and do, and she gets more and more revealed the more into the story we go, visually showing the audience just how much self-confidence Charlie Brown has gained over the course of the story. In this special, she feels less like a character and more like a prop. She has no lines of dialogue and no personality to speak of. If you're going to have her in a role where she doesn't say or do anything anyway, why are you even bother showing her at all? Like I said, I think as the years have gone by, this controversy has kinda waned, but it is something that was a big deal at the time, and I did feel needed to be addressed. But now we need to get into the second big controversy, and this one is significantly worse. Not just because it features some of the cruelest moments in the entire Peanuts franchise, but because said cruelty actually causes some significant plot holes. And the incident in question is that when Charlie Brown comes up to kick the football, Lucy pulls the football away. And keep in mind, this is right in the middle of an actual game, like with an opposing team and everything. And she does this not once, not twice, not thrice, but thrice. Is thrice even a word? You know what? I don't care. I'm making it a word. And then who gets the blame for this? Lucy for pulling the football away 4 times? Nope. Charlie Brown for missing the ball. And it's like, I'm sorry, are all these people blind? And it's not just that it happens that bothers me. It's that they keep lingering on this. Like they constantly keep bringing it up. they just keep piling on and on like it's all Charlie Brown's fault that we lost. We have one weak link in this team. We lost by 1 point because you missed the kick. When it is so obviously, painfully not true. This is made even worse by the line of dialogue where Lucy says that she'll hold it, and Charlie Brown says that she'll just pull it away like she always does. And then she says, would I pull it away in a very important game? Even though by this point she already had pulled it away from him twice. But this does raise the question, has she been doing this all year? Are these the only two players on the whole team that are holders and kickers? So, this might be a dumb question, but how exactly did they practice this? Was Lucy holding the football during practice and still continuously pulling it away from Charlie Brown? Because after a few times, you'd think the team would have noticed and said, hey, Lucy, we're trying to practice. Stop trying to pull the football away. I know I'm probably thinking too hard about this, but this is not a small part of the special. Most of the special is made up of this football game. And apparently this special was too much for some viewers because the crew received a lot of letters about this part of the special in particular. So they actually went back and backmasked 2 lines of peppermint patties to soften the blow a little bit. In my opinion, it's too little too late, and the only way I could see this working is if it was done once at the very end. But by doing it 4 times, they actually go so far over the line that it actually becomes genuinely illogical, never mind cruel. Now, I know I spent a lot of time talking about these 2 elements in particular, and honestly, it's because there's not much else to the special otherwise. It introduces the main gimmick at the very beginning, then it spends the next 15 minutes just focusing on the football game, and then it briefly wraps up the story that the title is actually referring to in like 5 minutes. It feels like they came up with the title first, and then they realized they didn't have enough story for said title, but they just barreled through it. And honestly, that's not even getting into some of the other story problems that plague this one. Like Charlie Brown waiting until they're actually on the parade float in order to ask Linus what an escort is even supposed to do. What, did the teacher or some other adult in charge of this parade or whoever just not tell the kids what they were supposed to do? They didn't practice or rehearse or anything like that. They just threw the kids on the floats and then hoped for the best. So yeah, there's a lot of things about this that just don't work. Now, is it terrible? Not especially. I mean, we do get to see Charlie Brown win in the end, which I actually think many could argue does make up for the cruelty of what came before it. There is some nice animation, especially the part that visually shows us how Charlie Brown is feeling after having kissed the little red-haired girl. That part was really creative. The antics of Snoopy and Woodstock are always fun to watch. And aside from the aspect of Lucy pulling the football away, the football game itself is decently enjoyable to watch. I think the special is mostly just a consequence of not really thinking their implications or even their plot progression through. The script just feels very rushed and was perhaps a sign that maybe they should be slowing down just a little bit. Also, I should mention that what might be the most unrealistic part of this entire special is that a crowd for a football game was actively cheering on a ref. Speaking of which, why was Snoopy the ref anyway? Who knows? What a nightmare, Charlie Brown. And now for something completely different. Yes, out of all the Peanut specials out there, this one definitely stands out as the real oddball of the group. Not only does it feature almost none of the Peanuts' mainstay characters, featuring only Snoopy and Charlie Brown, and even in the latter's case, only very briefly, this special's main focus isn't necessarily on telling a downbeat story or telling jokes. Instead, the entire thing is all about creating an experience. In this case, showcasing a nightmare of Snoopy being a sled dog in the Arctic. Now, because the story is so different from typical Peanuts, and the whole entire point of the special is how much can we torture Snoopy and get away with it, I can definitely see a lot of people disagreeing with my take on this one. And speaking of which, give credit where it's due, you do feel the pain that Snoopy goes through. I 100% buy that he is tired and thirsty and cold and scared. The animation, the voice performance by Mil Melendez, and even the atmosphere go a long way in making you feel every bit of pain that Snoopy goes through. But honestly, that's probably why this one is so divisive, because of course the real question anybody would ask is, why would anybody want to watch that? Well, for a couple of reasons. The first is that it does put a character in a hypothetical situation and allow us to examine them in it, but done in a way that doesn't affect continuity one bit. It's something different, something we haven't seen before. And it's interesting to watch this crew make something that is just so unlike any other Peanuts special out there. You don't get the feeling that this was made because of executive demands. This feels like something that the crew actually wanted to make, which is exemplified in the fact that Bill Melendez actually returns as a co-director alongside Phil Roman for the very first time since A Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. And not only that, but there is a point to the entire thing. For one, it is supposed to be a nightmare, so here, the cruelty on display doesn't feel over-the-top mean-spirited like it would if it was actually happening. And you could make an argument that we're taking a look inside Snoopy's psyche as we get to experience firsthand just what would be his biggest nightmare. So there's some interesting character work going on in here. And of course, Snoopy learns not to take his owner and the life he has for granted, so it's not just being cruel just for the sake of being cruel, it is done with purpose. And there are some clever bits to it as well. Like, the Sledder is conveyed primarily through shadows, and his voice sounds like the typical trombone noises that's typically associated with the adults on Peanuts, but they did something to it. Like, maybe they slowed it down or added some bass to it. That not only makes him more intimidating, it also fits in with the nightmarish atmosphere to the whole thing. And they do a really good job at finding that perfect balance of an atmosphere that feels just real enough, like nightmares often do, while still having a definite dreamlike ambiance to it. So this is a case where they sought out to do something, and they're largely successful at it. Now, some parts do get a little repetitive, and I feel like there were ways they could have worked at making it less so. And there is this bizarre bit of Charlie Brown getting miffed at Snoopy for not being able to pull a sled, which does feel a little out of character for him. But overall, I admire them for trying something so completely different and largely succeeding. Now, is it, as Bill Melendez and Charles Schultz thought, one of their all-time greats? No, I don't think so. Can I also understand why this one is so divisive? Also yes. But in my opinion, this one is at least worth giving a chance, because they did try something different, and I think that's worthy of respect. And in my opinion, the story risk mostly paid off. You're the greatest, Charlie Brown. Less a special with a story and more of an educational tool to explain to kids what the decathlon is and all the events associated with it, and quite possibly as an illustration of what being a good sport and what being a bad sport looks like. Now, that's not to say that it does that badly. For what was asked of it, it does that rather admirably. But I can't really say that automatically makes this a great story. Most of the special is just watching four characters, Charlie Brown, Marcy, Snoopy, and some bully kid from another school that I'm sure has a name, but quite frankly, I don't care enough to look up, compete in the decathlon, event by event, with varying levels of success for each character. Which does kind of raise the question of how Charlie Brown and Marcy were both able to compete in the same events for their school, while the other school only gets one. Maybe that's a real thing that's allowed, but I don't know. That seems like a pretty unfair advantage to me, but whatever. It's not like there's anything actively working against this one. There's no frustrating moments. There's no horrendous animation. There's no added character moments or anything like that. It's just kind of a this exists kind of special. The only thing this thing does to elevate it just a little bit is the ending punchline that Charlie Brown had the opportunity to win the decathlon, but of course he winds up running off the track because he became overconfident and isn't paying attention to his surroundings. It's a pretty funny payoff, all things considered, and I think makes the special worth watching just for that alone. And even all things considered, the special does still largely end on an upbeat note, so it does act as something of a palate cleanser to the cruelty of both It's Your First Kiss, Charlie Brown, and What a Nightmare, Charlie Brown, which is nice. I guess the only other noteworthy thing about this special is the line from Lucy who says that Charlie Brown could be the next Bruce Jenner. You know, I probably could make some kind of snarky comment here, but I think I'm gonna leave that hornet's nest alone. She's a good skate, Charlie Brown. What's this? Adults talking? Like, intelligibly? And they're visible? What franchise do you think this is? Anyway, all kidding aside, it is quite jarring when you do hear that first adult talking. It is very distracting. I'm not even sure why, because the story doesn't really call for it. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on this too much, so let's actually talk about the story. Charles Schulz once said that the only Peanuts character that could support a comic strip all on their own was Peppermint Patty. And this special actually does kind of show why. She is a really good character with her own identity. Loosely adapted from a storyline from the comics, and by loosely I mean it has the same setup, the original strip was more of a series of misadventures of how everything goes wrong for Peppermint Patty, up until the big reveal that she'd accidentally mistaken a roller skating competition with an ice skating competition, rendering all of her suffering moot. It's a funny storyline, although one that would not have translated well as a story for television. They even bring up the ridiculous looking wig from that same storyline, only for Peppermint Patty to just dismiss it. So they instead opted to have this be a more quiet, low-key story of Peppermint Patty just practicing her ice skating until it's time for competition. And what I do like about this is that the rest of the Peanuts gang aren't really the focus. Here, this is Peppermint Patty's story, and she gets a chance to shine, albeit with supporting roles for Marcy, Snoopy, and Woodstock. And this one mostly gets its pacing right. It knows when to have a slower moment. It knows when to interject with a funny moment, like Peppermint Patty and Snoopy wiping the floor with some bully hockey players. And yeah, let's talk about that ending, because honestly, this ending is one that really propels this one a great deal. When the cassette tape that's supposed to play Peppermint Patty's song that she skates along to suddenly stops working, Woodstock actually steps up to the plate and whistles it so that Peppermint Patty can continue her routine unimpeded. And they even got a real professional whistler, Jason Victor Serenis, to do the whistling. It's a really nice, sweet moment that just gives you a warm feeling inside. Now, are there things that don't quite work? Sure. Like I said, the adults talk when it's not needed, and that's distracting. I'm not even sure how it tracks that Snoopy is the one in charge of playing all the routines for the skaters, even though he's also the coach to one of the skaters. Wouldn't that qualify as a conflict of interest? And the actual skating competition itself isn't really mentioned until like 8 or 9 minutes into the special, when it really needed to be mentioned earlier, preferably at the beginning, because it shows us at the beginning that Peppermint Patty is actually ice skating with a goal in mind. She's not doing it just for the sake of doing it or for fun. And while I did say that the pacing was really good, there are 1 or 2 times where you do kinda wish the pacing would pick up, just a little bit. And one final note, even though I don't think this is a big issue, I should bring up that the cynical element that pervades quite a bit of the Peanuts' other specials is largely missing here. Anytime there's a conflict to the story, it more or less gets resolved in under 30 seconds without much fuss. Now, given this one's intended to be more Peppermint Patty's story and not Charlie Brown's story, I actually don't mind all that much. But I can understand if this is something that just doesn't work for you. Is this particularly fantastic? Not especially, but it is exceptionally pleasant. It's very mellow and has a soothing winter aesthetic without any reference to Christmas in sight. So this is very much a winter special, not a holiday special, of which, now that I'm thinking about it, there really are not that many of them. So it is unique in that regard. It has distracting elements for sure, but what it gets right, it gets really right. Life is a circus, Charlie Brown. Apparently going forward, starting with the 80s, the Peanuts decided to just randomly show adults for no real reason. Anyway, this one is the one where Snoopy joins the circus. Or rather, Snoopy gets kidnapped by the circus. Seriously, what is the deal with Snoopy just getting dog-napped all the time? This is mostly just a filler special. It doesn't ever feel like they have any kind of story worth telling here. Basically, Snoopy gets kidnapped. He stays because he falls in love with one of the Poodle performers. He performs badly, rehearses, suddenly he's a hit, and then runs away once they try to dye him pink. That, no exaggeration, is pretty much 85% what happens. This special doesn't have a flowing story. It's not showing off how much fun going to the circus can be. It's not even really trying to say anything about the circus. It's just watching Snoopy in this situation, and the writer's not doing anything interesting or unique with it. And out of all the characters I can think of putting them in a situation where they're struggling to adapt to circus life, Snoopy is literally the last character I would think to use. Snoopy would actually adapt very well to a circus act. I don't buy him being scared of the trapeze, I don't buy him being nervous or embarrassed about performing, and I don't buy him being afraid of heights. And what? Do circuses typically just kidnap dogs and just throw them into an act without any kind of preparation whatsoever? Everything about this just rings false. And then there's the love story between Snoopy and this poodle. I honestly can't remember if she had a name or not. This story is there. Basically, she acts kind of aloof to him at first, and then the better he performs at the circus, the more she starts to like him. It's really not any more complicated than that. And at first, I kind of thought something could be done with this, because at first it seems like she's kind of nervous about performing the trapeze act with Snoopy. Maybe if Snoopy was silently encouraging her or even showing off to show her how safe it was while also trying to impress her, or heck, even if she almost fell from the trapeze and Snoopy saved her from falling, that would at least be an attempt at trying to build some kind of connection, some kind of chemistry between them. But nope, they just let that opportunity at actually trying to make the story more interesting just pass them by. The closest thing we get is when the little girl threatens to dye her fur pink. Snoopy actually puts himself between the two of them, but the moment is kind of undercut by the following scene where the poodle chooses to go back to the circus anyway. The same one that just tried to dye her fur pink, and that she had just run away from. On the one hand, I understand why they did this, because they couldn't end with her running away with Snoopy, because, you know, the status quo and all that. But we're not really given a reason for why she chooses to go back. So she actually comes across as pretty callous and shallow, which I do not believe they were trying to get across. I think they were trying to get across that this has just been her home all her life, and so she doesn't know anything else, but that is not how it comes across in the final product. If they really didn't want to end with her running away with Snoopy, maybe they could have revealed that she was also dognapped by this little girl and she reunites with her owners. I don't know, just something, anything, even if it was something contrived. But instead, what we're given is just a flat story without much depth. It genuinely feels like the creators had almost no time to write the story and were rushed to deliver something before a set deadline. I'm not saying that's 100% for sure what happened, but that is definitely how it comes across in the final product. Oh, and I guess I should mention that the special would randomly cut to a subplot of Charlie Brown being sad that Snoopy's not around, which would actually be kind of heartwarming if this wasn't like, what, the third time they've done this storyline? It's getting old by this point. Alright, that's 10 more reviews down, 30 more to go. Now, the quality of these 10 shorts were definitely more varied compared to the first 10. Is it because the crew was getting burned out from making 1 or 2 of these a year? Did they just put more effort into certain ones and then just didn't care as much about the others? I honestly can't say. But downgrade or no, there are still some real classics in this one, proving that this crew is still more than capable of making something truly special. And I will give them credit. Even though there are lackluster specials out there, none of them, at least for now, have been really bad. So far, the lowest score I've bestowed upon them is a 5 out of 10. Definitely not good, but still at the very least watchable. Even in their more infamous specials, it does still manage to work in some amusing moments that make it at least palatable enough. Is this streak going to continue? Well, there's only one way to know for sure, and that's to press on with this project. So next time we'll be taking a look at some of the not quite as popular Peanut specials out there, like a Charlie Brown Celebration, or It's an Adventure Charlie Brown. And we'll also be taking a look at the animated adaptation of the 1967 musical, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, which also features the first instance of animated Snoopy having a speaking role, as well as the special with the reputation of being one of the most infamously cruel Peanut specials, and the only holiday special of the next group. Happy New Year, Charlie Brown! That's going to be a special that I cannot wait to talk about. And I'm actually going to be entering a period where there are specials that I haven't seen before. So I'm actually looking forward to experiencing some of these for the very first time. And I guess that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to be notified of when part 3 comes out, make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss it. Anyway, have a good day, and I'll see you next time.